In the midst of 9/11, the United States was in crumbles. In distraught, shock, and grief, the nation had to pick up the pieces. They vowed to never repeat such horrors, never putting the American people in danger again. And in the midst of all the calamity, two former intelligence contractors, Thomas Drake and Edward Snowden, stood up with their courageous yet very controversial choices. Though their approaches and results differed much, their actions raised the same critical question: where do we draw the line between national security and individual rights? To understand what they revealed, let's rewind to shortly after 9/11. The US took swift action for national security. Before 9/11, domestic spying by the NSA had been curtailed for decades following the abuses during the Nixon administration. But with the urgency to prevent another devastating attack, NSA's mission was reversed back to the Nixon times. This time with an aggressive focus on gathering data from all people around, including especially the American people. Phone records, internet activity, every bit of information was being scoured from millions of Americans to identify potential threats. As NSA General Counsel Robert Dietz once said, in the intel world, if a president says to you, "I need this in order to keep the American people safe," you need to try to figure out where that line is constitutionally and march right up to it. However, if intelligence officials are constantly pushing and tackling the balance of constitutional protections and, in essence, the ethical principles that govern the nation, at what point do they begin to lose bits of foundation in their ethical judgment? For them to realize how wide the gap has become between their perceived ethical behavior and their actual behavior. Thomas Drake, a senior NSA executive, oversaw the threat, a program designed to protect privacy by anonymizing data unless a court order was granted. However, when the NSA launched what they called the program, it stripped the threat's protections. One by one, his colleagues retired, unwilling to continue support of these violations. But Drake remained, using internal channels to report his concerns. But NSA's General Counsel Vito Vicenza dismissed his warning, saying, "You don't understand. All the lawyers have approved that it's legal. We're under emergency conditions, and extraordinary means are required to deal with the threat. We just need the data." Despite his efforts, Drake faced mounting opposition, and internal dissent wasn't limited to Drake. Jack Goldsmith, a senior Justice Department official, raised concerns about the program's legality with David Addington, the vice president's legal counsel. Goldsmith wanted to pull back the endorsement for the program, and upon hearing that, Addington just roars at him and says, "If you do that, the blood of 100,000 people killed in the next attack will be on your head." For the higher-ups in hard defense of the program, people such as Cheney, Addington, Hayden, and others, their personal stakes at the moment were extremely high, riding on the protective framework of the president's explicit order. Interestingly, though, we see that the moment the Justice Department started expressing doubts here, going, we're not so sure this is lawful, it led to a great deal of concern and anxiety for NSA agents. Now, with doubts just swarming in and the reauthorization coming up, Attorney General Ashcroft had a duty to sign a reauthorization of the entire program every 45 days. And for over 2 years, he did so without fail. Now, he didn't want to, realizing it was wrong. But following the morning of his denial, there was a deadly terrorist attack in Madrid with over 10 simultaneous bomb blasts. In the turn of such events, Michael Hayden states, "Given the starkness of the Al-Qaeda threat, given the ambiguity of the situation, I thought the correct operational, legal, and ethical decision was, all right, we'll do this one more time on a somewhat different framework." Yeah. The program continued on for years and years after that. In a classic example of incrementalism, Michael Hayden rationalizes bypassing these established constitutional and national security frameworks. But we see how small ethical compromises, justified as one-time exceptions, can snowball into further justifications. This mindset shifts ethical boundaries, leading to individuals overlooking the consequences of their repeated deviations. And over time, these seemingly minor decisions can result in larger breaches of law and ethics, blurring the line between right and wrong. As incrementalism takes hold, ethical standards erode with normalization of, quote, cutting corners, or the idea that special exceptions are required for special circumstances. For over a year, the New York Times were well aware of the program. A big part of that had been from the president's trump card. It might sound familiar. He says, "If you guys publish this article and there's another 9/11, We're going to be called before Congress to explain how we failed to prevent it, and you should be in the chair beside us, explaining because you'll be complicit in allowing damage to our country.
He was saying, in effect, you, Arthur Sulzberger, will have blood on your hands if there's another attack that could have been prevented by this program.
Meanwhile, Drake had been complaining internally about the program for more than 4 years, and he felt that he was at the brink of the edge. He stated, all the proper internal channels had been exhausted, and one final choice was to actually touch the third rail and go to the press. And he did so, carefully leaking unclassified documents. The FBI eventually raided Thomas Drake's home, and for his actions, he faced severe retaliation. Drake had broken bureaucratic protocol, and as a result, his job was reorganized right from under him, left with nothing. No program, no people, no team, nothing. Quote, I was a direct threat to the national security of the United States. I truly had become an enemy of the state. Drake was charged with violating the Espionage Act. He spent 2 years draining all his resources on a private attorney, and then when he had no more money, he had to go to a public defender. Interestingly, the moment the FBI raided Drake's home and located these unclassified documents, the government suddenly reclassified those documents he possessed as classified documents. And that was the basis of his charges. Thankfully, however, he was able to accept a plea deal just days before his trial that dropped the charges in his indictment. Thomas Drake did not stop or directly change the government's surveillance program, but his whistleblowing did bring significant attention to the program's flaws. It led to a much broader public debate about government surveillance practices and the balance between national security and our civil liberties. People were now more aware and skeptical of government's truthfulness. A decade later, NSA contractor Edward Snowden, stationed in Hawaii, had access to extensive details on NSA operations. He watched how prior whistleblowers like Drake were treated, and instead of going through internal channels, Snowden decided to directly leak these classified documents he had to journalists, notably avoiding the New York Times for their previous hesitations. Labeled a traitor, he fled while he was in Hong Kong, and when the US government had realized where he was, they planned to take him while he was still trapped there. They were planning to set him as an example to others. And so, paperwork was in motion. They were going to capture him while he was still in Hong Kong. But in a miracle, he was only able to escape in time due to an error in the paperwork that America had sent to China. They had written his middle name as James. It was actually Joseph. As he was in a flight to Russia, stopped before his goal for the equator, his passport was canceled and invalidated by the government mid-flight. He found himself stuck in Russia, passport revoked by the US government. In parallel interviews, NSA Director Michael Hayden and Edward Snowden expressed starkly contrasting perspectives on the NSA leaks. Michael Hayden sharply criticizes Snowden's decision to leak NSA information, arguing that Snowden's disclosures weren't merely about specific information, but exposed how they collected it. Hayden warns that this exposure will have, quote, a really harmful effect on American intelligence for a very long time, end quote. Hayden goes further to describe Snowden's actions as stemming from a profound arrogance, suggesting, quote, it's the arrogance of an individual who looked upon the activity of the national agency and believed that his ethical and legal judgment trumped the judgment of his co-workers, his leadership, the American president, the American Congress, and the American court system. Hayden sees this as a dangerous presumption on Snowden's part, stating that Snowden would have had to believe, quote, his judgment trumped all those in order to create the kind of moral righteousness that he claims, end quote. In contrast, Snowden expressed his own ethical perspective, questioning, how can someone justify the violation of the rights of an entire nation without even law to lean on, end quote. Snowden sees the leaks as a stand against officials who, in his view, acted secretly and against the public's interest. Snowden's journey, which ended with Russia granting him asylum and citizenship, highlights the political complexities of whistleblowing in global context. Despite the stress and risks associated with its path, Snowden's actions left a lasting impact. His revelations led to the U.S. Freedom Act, which limited the NSA's ability to collect metadata. Globally, his disclosures led to an increased scrutiny of data privacy and influence on law. He encouraged people to consider the implications of governmental surveillance, to hold more skepticism towards government practices. The cases of Thomas Drake and Edward Snowden also reveal parallels to the ethical challenges in the accounting profession. In both fields, Professionals face pressures to conform to organizational norms, particularly when those norms conflict with legal or ethical standards. Whistleblowers in accounting, like those in intelligence, may find themselves caught between loyalty to their employers and a higher obligation to the public. By choosing to speak up about fraudulent practices or misrepresentation of financial data, accountants often risk their careers and reputations to uphold the principles of integrity and transparency that's essential to their profession. Let's further evaluate Drake and Snowden's actions to understand the complex motivations and consequences that come with their decisions through the lens of some models. Starting with Russ's four-component model, it provides a useful framework for understanding how Snowden and Drake made their ethical decisions. The process begins with moral sensitivity, the ability to recognize when a situation has moral implications. Both Snowden and Drake recognized that the NSA's mass surveillance program infringed on individual privacy rights and potentially violated constitutional protections. This moral sensitivity was a crucial first step in their ethical decision making. Moral judgment involves reasoning through possible courses of action and selecting the morally, in their opinion, right choice. For both men, the key decision was either to remain silent or expose the wrongdoing. Snowden, in particular, reasoned that revealing the program to the public was the only way to protect civil liberties. This prescriptive reasoning, what ought to be done in the face of government overreach, was grounded in his moral judgment. Moral motivation, the third component, refers to prioritizing ethical values over non ethical ones like self interest or career advancement. Snowden and Drake were driven by a commitment to uphold constitutional rights, just as accountants might be motivated by having honesty and public trust principles. They did this even knowing the personal cost that would incur. Ethical focus remained on protecting individual privacy and ensuring transparency. And when accountants act as whistleblowers, they must also demonstrate a moral motivation. They have to choose to prioritize the integrity of financial reporting over personal gain or organizational loyalty. In the end, we are seeing moral focus outweighing these non ethical pressures. There's a clear moral commitment. Finally, moral character is the ability to act on ethical intentions despite external pressures. Snowden and Drake overcame this to follow through with their decisions, and this mirrors situations accounting where individuals must act courageously, resisting the pressures to comply with the unethical pressures from superiors or colleagues. Both contexts illustrate that moral character is essential for translating ethical intention into impactful decisions, even when the stakes are high. We can also analyze their actions through different ethical theories. In the utilitarianism approach, we're asking whether sacrificing individual privacy can be justified for the greater good of public safety. However, Snowden and Drake's whistleblowing was motivated by a desire to protect the individual rights, arguing that the harm of privacy violations outweighed the benefits of increased security. And this dilemma lies in weighing these competing values. Whether protecting public safety justifies infringing on privacy, or if exposing government overreach ultimately benefits society more. Similarly, accountants face dilemmas where short term financial gains, such as inflating earnings to satisfy shareholders, might conflict with long term organizational stability and stakeholder trust. In both cases, decisions require weighing benefits and harms across various groups, from individuals to society at large. The deontological approach focuses on duties and rights, and from this perspective, violating individual privacy through mass surveillance can be seen as morally wrong, as it infringes on fundamental rights. Snowden and Drake's actions can be justified as a duty to uphold these rights, regardless of the consequences. However, the challenges arises when public safety is at risk. Does protecting lives justify violating rights? Can we argue to defend for individual privacy if the lives of these people to even exercise these rights are at risk? This creates a conflict between the duty to protect individuals' privacies and the duty to ensure safety, making the decision to act ethically much more complicated. In accounting, we often see that individuals have to adhere to the principle of integrity to ensure the accuracy of financial statements and compliance with legal standards, even when they're pressured to act otherwise. Now, the concept of tone at the top emphasizes the critical role leadership plays in setting the ethical culture within an organization. In the case of the NSA, the leadership failed to set an ethical tone that valued transparency and accountability. to consider the American people. This created a culture of groupthink where agents are expected to follow directives without questioning the ethical implications of it. In such an environment, many employees, despite their own personal ethics, simply accepted the legality of their actions and did not critically evaluate their moral consequences. This mirrors situations in accounting where poor ethical leadership can lead to widespread misconduct, such as normalization of earnings manipulation or fraudulent reporting. Snowden and Drake's decision to stand against this prevailing culture of compliance is a crucial part of their ethical journey. They rejected that groupthink mentality and prioritized ethical principles over blind loyalty to the organization. Their whistleblowing actions were a direct challenge to the status quo, a willingness to confront unethical practices despite the pressures to conform. The crucial part of ethical analysis is understanding the stakeholders involved. In these cases, we can identify several primary stakeholders. There's Drake and Snowden. Their commitment to transparency and civil liberties drove their decisions. Then there's also the US government and the NSA. Their primary concern was national security, and that's what the program was designed for. However, this raised questions about balancing the security and protection of individual rights because the public's trust in privacy was compromised, which causes the public to have a direct stake in this case. Snowden and Drake's actions were aimed to protect the public's liberties, which were jeopardized by the program. These revelations also had international ramifications, impacting the US government's relationships with global allies and enemies. The breach of privacy and surveillance on foreign governments led to tensions and trust issues on the global stage. By examining these stakeholders and the interconnectedness of their interests, we can see how Snowden and Drake's actions were driven by their commitment to the public good, even as their decisions created ripples across various sectors. There is a fundamental ethical dilemma we see much in the accounting profession: loyalty to an employer versus responsibility to society. In whistleblowing, the ethical responsibility often clashes with legal and professional obligations, seen with Snowden and Drake facing charges under the Espionage Act. According to the Georgia's criteria for morally permitted whistleblowing, whistleblowing is morally justified when it prevents harm and all internal reporting avenues have failed. Criteria both men met. Drake's course of action would have been my recommended course, but we can see that the consequences are devastating and the impact made can just turn null. But alternatively, going too far can just leave you stranded in Hong Kong and seeking asylum. Hence, a combination of Drake's follow through of the internal channels with a last resort of Snowden's document leaks would be most ideal. I would recommend to take the path that's truest to the best interests of the public, the right to know. In cases like those of Snowden and Drake, there's measures we can take to prevent a large chunk of unethical activity from occurring within many professional fields. And we can apply this to governmental, accounting, firms that are going to be audited, et cetera, to work towards a better future. Firstly, is encouraging ethical leadership. Leaders should cultivate a culture that emphasizes ethical responsibility alongside operational goals. Leadership should set a strong ethical tone to create an environment where employees feel safe to report unethical behavior without a fear of retaliation. Second is protecting whistleblowers. Whistleblowing should be encouraged and protected most certainly when internal channels are not getting through with it. They should ensure that those who expose wrongdoing are not punished but supported for acting in the public's best interest. Third is prioritizing oversight and transparency. As we see, surveillance programs must be subject to stringent oversight to ensure that they're legally and ethically justified. And the public should be informed about the government actions that affect their rights, just as stakeholders have to be when it comes to the businesses they're investing in. The best recommended course of action for the surveillance program, if it was truly necessary and the best option there was, should have been to undergo a similar program as Thread's original programming had intended, one that maintained the privacy through the automatic encryption. Encryption in surveillance programs parallel the need for secure and transparent financial systems in accounting. It means being transparent in accounting methods, to have better oversight over firm controls, etc., etc. Lastly, which is a bit connected to our previous point, is just bringing up public trust. In the long run, a government or a firm that upholds transparency and consistently communicates its intentions as being in the best interest of its citizens would build a trust and cooperation from the public. And when citizens feel informed or heard, they're more likely to support national security measures and work together with the government to ensure safety. It's transparency that enables the public to understand the necessity of such measures. We can foster a sense of shared responsibility and strengthen the social contract between government and the people. And the same can be said for accounting firms or those businesses that are audited by firms, where transparency and ethical conduct can create a lasting trust with clients and the community. By staying true to their values and prioritizing open communication, firms can inspire confidence, protect the public's interests, and strengthen the bond of trust that's essential to their work.